What's up artists, welcome to this Cinema 4D and Octane tutorial. Today we're going to be creating these pretty realistic winter-esque forests with Forester, and I'm going to try and make it as in-depth as possible. I'm going to break down each individual segment so you can jump to what part you desire. We're going to build up the scene asset by asset and then bring them all together to get the best result possible. The project files will be available on my store as usual, and without further ado, let's get creating. Okay, so to start things off, we're here in Cinema 4D and Octane. Now, getting this scene to look good took a lot of work. There's no tutorials out there on how to create a forest scene. I was messing around with it a lot, and I was choosing a lot of different approaches. Where do I want to go with it? How do I want to do it? I ended up going down the texturing route as opposed to using actual forest or snow. Way later I will go over forest or snow and we may consider it. Maybe that's something you want to consider. But for now, what we're going to do is we're just going to focus on texturing the leaves to give them a nice kind of snowy look to them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our trees. Now, if you've seen David Ariev's tutorials on Forester, he gives you the rundown of everything you need to do to get realistic digital nature scenes. It's something I turn to a lot. It's kind of my Bible when it comes to creating any kind of nature scene. And unfortunately, I couldn't really turn to it this time. For example, there's a trick that he shows about plugging your diffuse texture into your transmission to get light to go through the leaves. To get the snow to work in a lot of these, I actually had to turn that off. And that took my own incentivization to go and find that. And it was a lot of experimenting. So I'm saving you that here by bringing you this tutorial. What I found is that the trees make or break this scene entirely. One of the trees I did use was the Abries Frasery. I think that's how you pronounce it at least. So that was one of the trees I used. And what we can do is we can just get Octane on the go here, and we can drop in a floor here as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale the tree down. If you were planning to use snow, don't scale the tree down. The snow won't scale with it. So we'll come back to that later. But right now, we're just going to bring the scale down a decent amount to maybe somewhere around 0.4. And what we'll also do is we'll drop in an Octane daylight. Daylights are also pretty fundamental when it comes to getting your nature scenes to look realistic. And it's really up to you if you want to mix them with HDRI or not. So what you want to do is you want to just bump up your viewport levels there to 3. So we're getting leaves on the tree. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to materials, convert materials, remove unused, and now they are Octane materials. So to get this snow looking, before we drop in any of the other trees, we are going to just use this tree and then put this material on all the other trees. There is one tree in particular I'm going to make completely white, and that is just to add a bit of variation and to act as if it's got snow all over it. The tree that I'm going to make completely white technically should be dead at that time of year, but we're going to ignore that and stylize it a little bit, and either way it still looks really realistic. Now what we want to do is we want to just set up a mix material similar to the way David taught us in that tutorial. Now of course you want to link these up just like that, and then once you've got your mix material you want to just drag it onto the first slot there. Give this a little refresh. I know I hit a funny button, but it works just as well. And then what you also want to do is make the second material glossy, bump up the roughness, and plug this into the transmission there, and light will start passing through the leaves. Easy. I'm actually going to bring in a bit of a dummy tree here. I'm just bringing in the tree to get the material. So the tree I'm going to bring in is the white tree, the Pyrus. Now once we've got the tree in, we can just delete it. We can delete the trunk and we'll convert it. Don't want to do that. We'll convert it. Remove unused. Sorry. It is unused. You don't want to remove unused. And what we just want to do is we just want to Control C on this texture, come back into our mix, Control V, bring that in and plug that into the diffuse. Materials, remove unused. Now, the way we're going to build this material to explain it is we're going to differentiate between, and there was a few different ways I tried this, but we're going to differentiate between the green leaves and the white leaves. And that makes it look very realistic. You do want to see quite a lot of green. You don't want to just create a white forest that look like an alien planet. What you want to do is create a kind of mix. So I used a fall off map mixed with a noise, and that created this kind of snow on top of the leaf, green underneath, mixed with a bit of randomization, and it gave me a pretty realistic result that I was happy with, especially since we were looking at the trees from a distance. Now the way we can tackle this to begin with is actually unplugging it from the transmission. We actually don't really want that. Just did that at first to set up your basic material, and then what we can do is bring this way out here, and we want to put in a mix, and we want to duplicate this. And then what we want to do is we want to plug them both into the mix. Now we are going to use a color correction on both of them, and that will come in a little bit later, and that's just so we can kind of heighten the whiteness a bit, bring the saturation down, bring the gamma down a bit, get the leaf looking a little bit more snowish, because you don't really want to see much of the texture there. You more or less just want to see white. And then what we can do is just plug that mix into the diffuse there. You can already see it starting to part. We'll put a float into the amount, and then we'll use a noise. Now a noise is kind of going to act as a trigger, an on or off switch. For example, what's going to be black will be green, and what's going to be white is going to be white. So we'll plug that in there, and we'll put in these two nodes there. Those two, the transform node especially, can be quite vital here. We might want to put that to about 4, and we'll solo it. The reason we solo things is just so you can kind of see exactly what you're working on, and it saves a ton of time. When you solo a node like this, if I immediately mess with the contrast, you can see it, or the gamma, you can see it affecting that and nothing else. Everything else is irrelevant. So that's why we solo nodes. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to bring the scale up a little bit more. Maybe to about 7. And then we kind of want to bring these down. We don't want it looking too complicated, so we kind of want to keep them at a decent level. And you want to play with this, and it does take a little bit of fiddling, and you want to play with it until you're getting a nice mix between black and white. Now what you maybe want to do is put the float all the way up to 1, and that's going to mean we're only looking at this leaf material here. So now, when we're affecting the noise, I maybe should have went over this first, we're only looking at this top material here. So we can maybe get away with making this a little bit bigger, maybe way smaller. Again, it just takes that playing with it to get it to a point that you'd like. I think setting it to box helps, and then maybe coming back up with the scale a little bit, and we're getting a nice bit of variation now. That's at a decent scale. I think I'll maybe stick around 5. And then what we can do is bring in a gradient and pop it on there. And what this is going to do is this is going to act as a clamp. Imagine you're clamping something down to a surface, and of course you want to solo the gradient now, and it's going to make the black on white very harsh. There's going to be little transition between them. And then what we can do is we can use a fall off map here, delete our float, put a gradient in, we'll set that fall off to, and we'll unsolo this, and we'll set that fall off to 90 degrees, and you're going to want to play with this. We can solo that now. You're going to want to play with this until you get a nice kind of effect where we're getting white on top of the green. Something a little bit like this. If you disable that, you can kind of see the effect playing out here. And we'll pop that gradient back in here. And of course it does take a little bit of playing with. You can kind of judge it by looking here to see, just on this little image, how much of the leaf may be white and how much of it might not be. I think leaving it pretty close to its default value is going to get you kind of the effect you want. I think maybe something where the minimum value is kind of around 0.7, I think, 0.6. Probably looks pretty good. Now, some trees show this way better than others. I do think that AB's probably isn't the best tree in the world when it comes to showcasing the way this texture is going to look. So what we can do is we can just turn that off there and we can duplicate it. So once we've duplicated it, we can go in the tree library, and what we can do is drop in a couple more trees. So, sorry if I butchered these, but there's a tree called the Picea abies, or Picea abies, this one here, and this tree really helped sell the scene a lot for me. Personally, we're just going to pop a couple more leaves in there. And one thing I was trying to say before and elaborate on it is that specific trees make or break the way this look. I was using a tree in particular, I think it was a cypress of some sort. If I just find that tree here so I can explain. Okay, it was the Populus nigra, and this tree had no kind of, I think it's supposed to be evergreen, but it didn't come across evergreen, and when I zoomed in it looked horrible. And as soon as I switched it out for this Abies here, it completely changed the scene. So you really want to pay attention to what trees you're using. Next up, we're going to duplicate this again, turn it off, and we're going to go for the Kaizuka. The Kaizuka added a ton to this scene, an absolute ton. And when I brought this in, I really noticed it add to the scene. It just has that kind of winter fluffiness to it. And then the last tree we're going to use on the evergreen side is the, sorry if I butcher this, the Pinus strobus. I don't want to say penis, but penis. So we'll just find that here. This one, again, this is another tree which just completely sold the scene and made it look amazing. And we'll let that load in. As you can see there, it is really good at holding these big clumps of snow, and I really felt like that brought a lot to the scene. Lastly, we're going to duplicate this one more time, and we're going to bring in a tree which technically should be dead in the winter. And you have to remember, we are creating art here, we're not recreating reality, so there is some areas we can just kind of bend the rules a little bit. So the tree I'm looking for, I cannot find at all, and that is because it is the rainbow eucalyptus. Oh, here it is. It's this one. Right, it's a rainbow yucca. Okay, so this tree, we're just going to set to 5 there. And we'll maybe bring down the trunk length a little bit. Trunk parameters, trunk height, we'll maybe just bring that down a little bit. Now, what you actually want to do is just go into this and double hit that so it loads in there. And then call this tree, call this green, and call this one white. And then group them all, materials, add to new layer, call it tree green. And then what we actually want to do is we're going to delete the rainbow eucalyptus and bring it in again, go to tree library. The reason we're doing that is so we're getting a new set of materials. And we'll just find the rainbow yucca again. Where was it? Where was it? Here. And we're going to have to bring the trunk way back down again. I can never find it. It's here. And we'll just set back up to 5. And we'll do them convert again. And we'll have to do the scale again too. So we'll do that with a put. And I'm going to twist my daylight around a little bit, just to get a little bit different light on it. Get more of a sunset vibe maybe. Okay, so this time we're going to set up the mixed material again in the exact same fashion. Material 1, material 2, pop in a float, pop this in here, pop this in here, pop this in there, and we'll put in a color correction and hook those up to the diffuses. And this material is going to be a bit more reminiscent of your classic kind of forester material, and we're going to make sure that that's abiding to the rainbow eucalyptus. And we'll pop in a separate color correction for there, and we'll maybe actually just do a separate one for here too. And if we solo this here, the first thing you want to do is bring the saturation up, bring the hue down a little bit, but then bring the gamma way down, so we're getting a pretty white tree but still a little bit of green in there. And you can see the effect that's kind of going to have there. I may in fact just try to plug that in like that, and then you maybe want to do the same thing here, bring that down, bit of contrast, and now we've got a white tree, but it's catching the sunlight quite well. So we're just gonna kind of leave that like that. I know it's relatively unrealistic, but when it's in the scene later on, you're gonna see how it adds a lot. The big white fluffy trees really bring a lot into the scene when in contrast to the green trees. A way you can counter this is by using a normal tree that does have our white and green texture on it. And just a quick tip for trees like the Abies, Frasery, they come across a little bit thin. And one thing I want to try and capture with this is fluffiness. You want the trees to be big and fluffy. So if you set the leaf size to about 1.5, rather than increasing the leaves but the size of the leaves, you get a much fluffier look and a much more wintry look. But what I want to go over here is the reason we've duplicated this is we're going to put a scale back up to 1, and if you remember what I said earlier, don't create snow unless you're leaving the scale the same, because the snow won't. And that's because if we generate some snow here, you're going to have to give it a second. To begin with, it's going to look really stupid, and that's because you don't want to create snow on a tree with leaves. You want to create snow just on the branches. So we'll delete it, and we'll bring our viewport levels down to 2. And now if we create snow, it's going to look a little bit better, but not where we want it to be. So we'll delete it again, and what we'll do is we'll put snow at every 9th branch, maybe to about 3, snow start level to 1, and now it's getting there. So we're going to do that a little bit more, maybe put that to about 5, maybe put that to about 1. So what we'll do is maybe put this to about 4. You can see it's starting to get there. Maybe 3.5, maybe 15. And I'd say that is some okay snow. Put this back to 3. Now what we have is snow inside the tree. I think that's probably your best alternative to using the rainbow eucalyptus, probably a more realistic alternative. What I may do for the sake of the tutorial is use this and switch between them so you can see. It does look okay, especially if we put kind of a crystallized snow texture on it so light passes through it, which I'll probably do right now as well, just so you can see. Because for all I know, you may really want actual snow geometry, and it would be a shame for me to offer this tutorial and not offer a solution like that. So what we'll do is we'll just, so this is white, and we'll just call this 2, and we'll call this 1, and we'll add this to white tree. And now for the snow. Okay, so we'll put in a mix, get into our node editor, and we'll pop in a couple, and we're just going to create like an SSS material with a bump. So what we can do is we can keep that as, we'll put it to glossy actually, and we'll put our roughness way up. And this guy can be a specular 1.52, we'll get our fake shadows in there, and we'll get our scattering medium. So a scattering medium in there, a couple RGB spectrums, keep them white. Bring this down, bring the roughness up here too, pop that on the snow, and now it's going to be at least looking a bit better. Can mess with this a little bit, and what we'll do is we'll put in a noise, pop that in the bump of the glossy material, come way in, actually turn off the tree completely. And as you notice, that's a bit minging, so we can bring this down to about 15 so it looks a bit more smoothed out. And you can see that the noise is actually at work there. So if you set this to box, solo it, get a good bit of contrast on there, make this quite complex. Bring the scale down, it's just really small. And we'll maybe just mess with this a little bit more. Yeah, that should do. And then unsolo that. It was unsoloed, didn't even realise. And we'll turn the tree back on. And I'd say that's probably, you could go way more in depth with it. You could apply all these different snow textures, and especially if you use like a real snow texture, that probably look really cool. I would probably take it to about there and leave it. For the sake of the tutorial, I will. That will be the snow tree, so we'll call that snow tree, and we'll leave that there. Now, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to save this as a scene with some snow assets. Do not want to be here, up in here. So what we'll do is we'll just call this snow assets trees, and now we'll make some grass. Okay, so I've decided I'm just going to make the grass in the same project file. I think that'll be a bit easier, and then we'll move to another one to do the terrain, or maybe even just stay here as well. So this is going to be building the grass. This is going to be the kind of second phase of the tutorial. So one thing you kind of want to think about here is the grass isn't going to be completely visible. The snow is going to be kind of fighting with it, because there's going to be snow on the ground. It's going to be thick snow. We kind of want this to be like Alaska, or maybe a country with seasons that get snow, so maybe something a bit more like Canada. And the snow is going to be patchy. Sorry, the grass is going to be patchy. It's not going to be everywhere. It's also going to be very wild, and it's not going to be looked after at all. So you don't want to use any kind of neat grass. You want to use grass that's going to look messy and just kind of not looked after, very wild grass. So we'll drop in our forester multiflora here. We'll come way down. We'll take a little look at our grass here. And of course, the first grass I'm going to use is the wild grass patch. So if we just grab all these and go materials, convert materials, remove unused materials, and we've got kind of the same effect there. So I want this to kind of be the bulk of the grass. I want it to be quite fluffy again, and what we'll do is we'll just kind of play with this here. So we'll turn up the node count a little bit, and then we'll bring the patch radius, and we'll bring up that node count, and we'll just kind of bring them up. Make sure they coincide with each other, bring them up, bring the length up a little bit, and then there is one in particular, the bend here. Yeah, I want to play with that quite a bit, bend out even more, and tropism, I believe that like tilts it, so you may want to add a bit of that just for the sake of maybe adding some wind later on as well. But for now, we'll just kind of leave it like that. Can maybe mess with the size a little bit. We've got quite a wild looking patch of grass there. We'll duplicate it, and this time we will go for I believe probably just long grass, and we'll make this one a little bit tighter. You still kind of want it to be clumped over, but we're going to come down to that bend. I'm going to make sure this one's bending out too. We just kind of want these this long grass here to be the longer sections of the grass patches, and I'm pretty much going to leave it at that, and we're just going to go straight into the texturing. Okay, so we've got both our grass patches here, and we're just going to come into the node editor, and we're going to set up a mix material. Now, if you remember the way we used the fall off map, and we differentiated between the white leaves and the green leaves, we're going to do a similar thing here for the blades of grass. Now, what we want is, as you can imagine, it's snow to the top of the blades, and it fades down to that green. You don't really want as much noise, you more or less want that snow sitting on top of the grass look. So what we'll do is we'll just make this second one glossy, and we'll put the roughness up, and we'll put this in the transmission, put the mixed material on the both of them, and you can see we're kind of getting the look we want now. One thing I'm going to take a second to say here, which I'll go over again later: lighting is absolutely the most vital part of these scenes, and shifting the daylight around in a circle can make it go from looking horrible to make it go to looking hyper realistic. So we'll remember that for later on. I want you to remember that for all your scenes, not just these scenes. Okay, now as you can imagine, we don't really have a white leaf we can use this time, so what we're going to have to do is make this texture completely white, which we kind of did the last time, but we're not really going to do it, we're going to do it way like to the extreme. So what we'll do is we'll just pop this in here, the texture, and I'll just zoom in, there we go, and we'll solo this, and we'll make it kind of completely white, just like that. We don't really want much green showing at all, really just kind of want to eliminate it all. I'll drop in a float here, and we'll just come up to down to 0 so we can see that's how white we're looking at. Maybe bring up the gamma a bit, just so that texture plays a little bit more. You just want to keep it as white as possible, because this texture can be very fiddly, and it can be hard to get the texture to show up right and to get the light to show right. So what we'll do is we'll just unplug the transmission for now, and we'll bring our float back up to 1, and we're going to drop in a mix here, and we're just going to plug this into the texture 1, and we're going to put a color correction on that there, and we're going to plug it back into the transmission, and we'll put a color correction on it there. And the reason you kind of want those separate color corrections is to prevent overpowering and kind of one leader over them all, because you can change both these settings to get the same result, but if you only have one color correction here piping through the whole thing, you can't make changes later on. So it's just kind of it's reinforcement. It's like not working destructively, if you get what I mean. So it's just something I kind of do there. It can add what some people would call redundancy, but to me it's safety, so I don't have to rely on specific functions to do everything for me. So what we'll do there is we'll pop in the fall off map and the gradient, and then on the fall off map you want to go to that 90 degrees, and you want to just get the white coming down there like that, and then you want to use the gradient to clamp it in. Not that much. Just kind of want to find the sweet spot there. Just something a bit like that. And then on the color correction, maybe you want to put the saturation up, bring the gamma down a little bit, and I'm going to release that just a tad, just like that. So now we have a pretty nice, hold on, Octane node editor, float texture, come back down to 0.5, and then put that gamma up, and yeah, I think that should probably do it. At a distance that's going to look really nice. I think that's probably where I would leave it. The grass is very, very white here. I didn't have it this white the first time around, but I think for the grass, that's kind of where I would put it. It's up to you if you want to mess with that more. And next, what we'll do is we'll move on to building the terrain and going over how I did that. Okay, so I have indeed decided I'm going to stay in the same project file to build the terrain. The way I did this was I used a couple different landscapes, and it was kind of similar to what David went over in the Bible, as I'm going to call it, and I used some RD textures, and I mixed between a snow texture and a rock texture with displacements, and kind of left it at that really, and had the rock poking through. I wanted a nice mix between the rock and the snow, and I made it quite aggressive as well. I made the landscape quite aggressive. One trick I want to make sure that you know when it comes to these scenes is make the scene look as good as you can before putting the trees down. Make a wonderful terrain that looks brilliant without any trees down, and then when you add the trees, it's only going to get better. So I think that's quite vital to do that. So what we'll do is we'll turn off our floor, and we'll pop this in, and we'll call that misc, because you never know when we might need it. And then we'll drop in a landscape, and I'm going to make it quite a bit bigger. If we look at this here, we're at, I'm going to go to about like 6,000 or 7,000, I think. And then what we want to do is we want to turn off borders at sea level, and we're just going to start playing with this. So maybe we want to bring the scale down a little bit. You don't want too many like furrows, and then you maybe bring the fine furrows down a bit, and the rough furrows can maybe somewhere in the middle. I think that's probably what I would call an okay landscape. Maybe take this up just for the sake of it. Once we've got the displacements on it and stuff, you're not really going to notice it, but if you scale that down, it'll probably end up... I'll leave it up just now. I will actually put it 10 by 10, and maybe add a bit of verticality to it. I'm doing NA and NB to switch there, by the way, NB and NA. And scale maybe up a little bit more, and bring those fine furrows up. I think this is probably nice enough. Right, we'll go with this for now. Okay, and I'm going to start working kind of more in this window here now, and that's kind of going to be because we're going to be working with scale quite intensely here. I don't really like the steepness of this, so I'm gonna kind of mess with that and get rid of that. I don't like that at all. And I'll maybe bring the scale just up a little bit. Sorry I'm messing with this so much. It does take a while to get this kind of exactly where you want it, but I think what I'll do is maybe put the textures in and then decide if I want to play with it more or not, because right now it looks good, it looks fine, but it's maybe just not exactly where I want it. So we'll stay there, and what we're going to do first is, usually I do the rocks first, so we'll do that. Now I really just use a glossy material, and I pop in my my image textures and kind of just sit at that really. I don't do a whole lot. I use the maps that are provided for me, and I wish I could say that I did some kind of magical trick, but I just use RD textures. Maybe you want to use some of their free ones, or you want to use polygon, whatever you have. I would just go for something with a lot of displacement. If you don't have access to any kind of expensive textures, there is alternatives. I would honestly suggest you go to polygon, grab some sort of neat kind of snow texture. So what I used was this kind of bluish kind of rock, and it was quite nice. I did have to desaturate it a little bit though, and that was just because it came across quite blue, quite aggressive, but I liked the fractalization of the rocks really. And of course, now for the big bad, we'll pop in the displacement, and of course I am going to use this in 8K. It's going to take a massive chunk out of the VRAM, but I assure you it's worth it. So then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to absolutely pile this up, and then if we minimize that and we bring the length U and the length V here to about 50%, you can see it immediately starts making it look a bit more realistic, and we'll just mess with that. We'll give or take a little bit, maybe go to about 500, and it's pretty realistic looking. I will pop in a color correction just on the diffuse there, and bring down the saturation, make it look a little bit more wintry. And what we can do is actually pop in a camera here, and we'll just pop in a protection tag just so we can't move that there, and we'll keep autofocus on and just kind of bring that up a little bit. So we're getting a little bit of compositing, maybe bring up the bloom a little bit, but we will save most of that for later on. We'll just stick with that for now. We will call this rock, pop him into the terrain category for our textures, and we'll do the same with the snow. So for the snow, just a glossy material, we're gonna duplicate this, and we'll call this rock, and we'll call this snow. Delete the material off it, pop this in, right off the bat call it snow, and add it to terrain. Okay, so I'm just gonna do the boring part and bring in all the textures. Okay, so now we're to the displacement. What we're going to do is we're just going to pop that to 8K, and we're actually going to leave this at the current amount for now. On the length U and V, I'm actually going to put it to about 10%, and that's going to kind of set the scale to something realistic. In fact, I'll go even lower to about 5, and what we'll do now is we'll mess with the displacement. And as you can see, there's a lot of footprints and stuff, and there's either two ways you can take this. You can completely overscale it, or you can keep it to its natural scale as much as possible. I'm going to unplug that specular map there, and we're going to put the rock back on. Okay, so this is going to be where we're actually going to mess with the rock itself, just to make sure they kind of follow each other and they look relatively similar. So we'll maybe just want the rocks peeking through, not too harshly, and we kind of want more snow than we do rocks. And if we pop out the camera here and we start going to some different angles, that is annoying me. So what we will do is we'll take that to something like 500. That will help it a little bit, but not a whole lot. You kind of just gotta avoid it when you're at a scale like this, or you're just gonna pop in a subdivision. Completely up to you. Once you start finding some camera angles that you're quite happy with, that's when you can kind of just tilt the daylight around a little bit and see what kind of look you want to get. think I'd probably leave it at something a bit like that right now. And I'm just going to mess with this a little bit more till I get to somewhere where I like. I think bringing down the amount of the displacement on the rock helps. It helps it not kind of just shoot so much out of the rock, and it helps it out of the snow, and it helps it kind of emerge more smoothly. Just to show you what I meant about the snow, if we are to put the displacement to something like 150, and we bring up our scale to match that to maybe something like 25 by 25, and then come back in here and maybe I want to lower this. There we go. That was caught up with me. I was wondering what was going on there. You can see some big footprints there, which is totally unrealistic. But once you've got the snow and everything on there, it can give a slightly nicer look, and it's something I quite like, because once the grass is all over it, you don't see the snow, the massive footprints, but it does look good. So maybe that's a look you want to pursue. I may or may not leave it like that for now. As expected, I'm just going to go back down. Looks absolutely ridiculous, but if you want to do it. I may go up to about 10%, we'll see, and I may make it a little bit more aggressive when it comes to the displacement. But I think that's probably all I'd really do. When it comes to the actual geometry here, I still don't like how aggressive and how steep it is, so I am going to attempt to mess with that a little bit more. I'm just going to get something a little bit more soft, a little bit more realistic, most importantly. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. I think this looks a bit more like terrain. It looks slightly terraced, and I like that, as you can see there. I think this is probably where I'm happy with the terrain. This is the first camera I set up, and I think the lighting is okay, and the scale is okay. The snow is maybe a little bit big regarding the footprints, but for now, we're just going to leave it. Okay, so now we've kind of got our lighting and our terrain in a place that we like. We're going to move on to building the forest. So when it comes to building the forest, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the grass. So what we'll do is we'll pop in a Octane scatter, and what we can do here is we can just turn our grass on, and what we're going to do is duplicate it, and we're going to pop it in there. Shouldn't really have to turn it on for that. And then we're going to take the snow. We want the snow to be the surface that's going to scatter. And we're going to take this to something absurd, like 100,000. And that looks quite nice. And of course what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a random. I'm going to call this grass. I'm going to call this grass random. We'll pop it into the effectors here. And we'll just zero these out. Spin this around a bunch. Something absurd like that. And maybe just jolt them around a couple centimeters. Come into your display here, sorry, your distribution, scale, noise, maybe set this to something like over, and you kind of want to get it to clump up into these little kind of pieces that's showing kind of patches of grass, but kind of also hidden between the snow as well, so something a little bit like this. And then we can get some contrast in there, bring down the brightness a little bit. Under the grass random here, can maybe bring down the scale a little bit, something like way lower like that, and then you can actually bring this back down to about 5% to get that scale of the snow looking a little bit more accurate. Scale is absolutely everything here. Maybe I'll bring that back up a bit, and again you're just going to play with it until you get a result that you like. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is up the count to about 300,000 here, just to kind of make sure that the entire terrain is getting covered. And you may want to go even higher, it's really going to depend. I think maybe even 400,000. I think I ended up at something around 700,000. As you can see there, the scene's kind of finally covered, and then I think it's probably a good idea to put that noise in. We'll go back to over, we'll go back to about 400 or 500%. I think you get much more realistic differentiations in the grass there, and it's going to help with your scale a lot. And then I think if you maybe just mess with the settings here, I think that's in a much nicer place. I think once you have a nice camera angle set up, and you adjust your daylight to a really nice position which accents both the rock and the terrain, I think that's when you're probably ready to move on to adding in some trees. When it comes to adding in trees, we are going to add in tree by tree. We'll mess with it. We'll call that grass. We'll go to objects, Octane scatter. Call this tree. We'll drop in the frasery first, and we'll go to surface, and we'll go to snow. Now we'll just normal align this straight away. The scale of the trees is okay. What I will do is pop in this random, go to -0.5 on the scale of the tree, mess with it a little bit. Now, because of the noise, it will be a repeated pattern everywhere, unless you kind of rotate them about like that. Now, let's drop in 2 more trees. You can see, it's starting to look okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put in the last 2 trees. Now I have realized I haven't set my render settings appropriately, so I'm just going to pop these in, and we're going to bring down our scale a little bit more. And then on the AB's tree we created, we're actually just going to pop the white, the same texture as the rainbow eucalyptus on there, and completely white those out. And then what you maybe want to do is just zoom out here, and you kind of want to pick a path where your trees are going to go along. I think if your trees are spread out, there's either 2 ways you can do a forest scene. You can either have these kind of lines of planted trees, or you can have this kind of spread out look, which is like what's going on right now, but I think you have to use a lot less trees if you use the spread out look. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the snow, going to make it editable, and we're just going to turn off the tree scatter right now, and we're going to just kind of, increase this, and we're just going to kind of select the path we want our trees to go along. So I'm going to do something like that, make it a bit smaller, hold shift, join it up there, come back around like that, go over like that, come out there like that. So we've kind of got these paths where the trees are going to go. We're going to go shift C, set vertex weight 100, come back to the tree, distribution, vertex map, set it to this snow, turn it back on, and now the trees should be along those paths. Now what that means is we can go from about 10,000, okay, that looks a little bit better, and we'll bring down the scale of kind of all of them to about 0.2. And now what we can do is maybe work our way back up to about 25,000, and we can see that looks okay. Now, one of the first things I notice is that if we go to our white tree here, it's looking a bit too green. It's kind of not whiting out enough. So what we'll do is we'll come to where our white texture should be, and we're just going to make it way more white. Just like that, problem solved. And I think we can maybe remove the scale on the random, and that gets the trees up to a bit of a nicer, more realistic height. Loosen up our lens a bit there. I kind of want to get just looking at in between the gap of the trees there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a warm fuzzies LUT. I'm just going to bring up on our white point and fight against the orange a little bit and get it blue. Maybe bring the LUT down, bring our bloom up, and the scene starts to look a little bit more wintry. Another thing we can do is come into our medium here, add some fog, make this white, bring the density up a little bit, bring the medium radius to about 8,000, bring our phase up, way up, bring our density down. This needs to be whiter. At this point, your compositing and your art direction is kind of going to take over, and you're going to kind of be messing with your cameras and your lighting and taking things back and forth until you're getting a look that you like. I'm just going to take off the rainbow eucalyptus here so you can see how the forest looks in a little bit more of its realism. We'll come to some of our cameras here. You can kind of see how it's looking. See, I like the stylized version of it. Now, another thing we can do is we can grab this snow tree here, and there is one thing we have to do with that, but what I'll do is we'll just turn this off, and we'll duplicate the snow tree. Now, we have to make this editable, bring this down, we'll come out the camera, and we'll bring this down to 0.2 like the rest of them, turn it on, and then what you want to do is you just want to scale the snow down until it matches, and then what we can do is we can just pop that snow right in there, turn everything back on, and now we have that snow tree intertwining with there, and you know what, I think that looks a lot more realistic. So I think for today's render we'll probably just stay with that. I like these big shadows coming over, they make it look really realistic. They really help sell the scene a lot. I do think this snow here completely outperforms the eucalyptus. I was going with the eucalyptus at first, mainly to kind of get that effect, as I wasn't having too much luck with the snow itself. Once I got my head around it, it came across quite nice. It's not what I used in the original render. Of course, one last thing you can do as well is you can add hyper wind to all of the trees here, and if you maybe just turn the multiplier up a little bit, that will also add a little bit of realism, get a bit of sway in the trees, and make them look a little bit more natural and less static. It's not always the easiest thing to see, but it does add a lot of life to the scene without you even realizing it. And we don't really want to use too much because we have the random effect there. It can kind of mess with the wind, I think. So we'll just leave that there. I've just kind of went around setting up cameras, letting them be. I think I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now. The mix between the snow and the greenery, I think it looks pretty cool. This is quite an aggressive landscape compared to what I used first time round, although it does look very nice, and I am quite happy with the result. I think maybe it's just going to take a little bit of tweaking to get something I really like, but that kind of, you know, you can keep messing with a piece of art forever. There's a certain point where it is done, and that's more of a decision than a finish line, I think. So we've went over any kind of extra details, the wind, the fog. At this point, all I could really show you is me spinning around lights and moving around cameras and setting up composition, and that's something you've got to do on your own. Make sure to use these big lenses that look like they've maybe been taken from a helicopter or a ski lift, like gondolas or something, because that's going to really add to the realism as well. And make sure you're thinking of yourself as a cameraman in real life, and your shots are going to get much more realistic. Think about the lighting, the direction of that lighting. Mixing a HDRI with it will also help kind of even it out a bit. Okay, so to finish things off, here is the same shot with a little bit of fog rendered out. It's not perfect. I'd like to say I like this result as much as my original render, but I spent days on that, and I've spent about an hour on this, so of course it's not got a pin on it, but I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial. I tried to structure it really well so you could follow along and you could take bits out, revisit the tutorial, and I hope this starts something, because there's not a lot of tutorials on creating winter scenes, and I had a lot of fun using what skills I had from other tutorials to create this one. I'll put the project files up on my store so you can analyze that, mess around with it, see what I've done, see what I've done in the original renders, and have a lot of fun with that. Thanks for watching this. Please share this tutorial. Make sure people get to see this. Make sure we all get to create these awesome forests. Without further ado, I will see you in the next tutorial very soon.